Throughout 2021, one thing has been clear. Something's different. After decades of decline, America's violent crime rate has been increasing, especially when it comes to homicides, which have soared in cities big and small across the country. Coming on the heels of years of near irrefutable evidence of the failure of the US's over-policing and incarceration approach, the rise has naturally prompted a whole bunch of input from a whole bunch of people about the reasons why and the ways to address it. But there's an important group often left out of this discussion. Because for all of our talk about crime and violence, we rarely hear from those working to address the roots of violence at the most grassroots level. So, in partnership with Guns Down America, a nonprofit dedicated to reducing gun violence, we spoke to some of those leading these efforts in their communities. These organizers are known by various names: violence interrupters, mediators, peacemakers, but they share a core mission: non-police solutions to violence. And they've become increasingly present in conversations around crime. Take Chicago, for example. The city has been at the center of the national conversation around community violence. But in recent years, it's also been at the forefront of the movement to shift from traditional policing and towards community-based approaches.
My name is Eddie Bocanegra. I'm the Senior Director for Heartland Alliance Ready Chicago. Ready Chicago is an innovative response to gun violence in our city. And we connect people who are most at risk of gun violence involvement with cognitive behavior therapy, employment, and support services. And the goal for us is to help create a viable path and opportunity for a different future, to help reduce gun violence in our city, in particular to help reduce gun violence with those who are mostly impacted by this issue.
These organizations often concentrate on different areas.
Linking people to risk reduction resources in their communities.
Mentoring of our young folks at very young ages.
Increasing employment, increasing access to housing.
But while strategies and programs differ across communities and cities, one aspect that sticks out is a focus on the cultural and even emotional underpinnings of violence. Sam Vaughn is the program manager for Richmond, California's Office of Neighborhood Safety.
These young men in the community, they feel like their only value is doing what they do. They feel noticed for all the wrong reasons. They feel valued for all the wrong reasons. And they're accepted for all the wrong reasons. And what we're saying is you can be accepted, you can be noticed, and you can be valued for all the right reasons if you're willing to invest in yourself.
Devon Bogan also works in Richmond.
I am founder and CEO of Advanced Peace. Advanced Peace works to interrupt gun violence by engaging those at the center of firearm activity and placing them in our well-known Peacemaker Fellowship, a very intensive daily engagement process for those who are at the center of firearm hostilities.
He frames violence as a public health issue, a kind of virus to be healed rather than bludgeoned.
One of the most, if not the most significant driver of interpersonal violence, gun violence, is interpersonal violence and gun violence. That begets the next stage of it. So yeah, gun violence begets gun violence.
Rochelle Dicker, a trauma surgeon who founded the Wraparound Project, has seen this firsthand.
When you see a lot of people coming in violently injured and the same people coming in violently injured again, you start realizing that violence is a chronic disease. It's a public health problem. It has risk factors. And so it became very difficult feeling as a trauma surgeon, like you're standing at the bottom of a waterfall, just putting really fancy bandages on people. And sending people back out without the resources to really thrive.
Same goes for Fatima Dreyer, who leads the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention, helping hospitals across the country run violence reduction programs.
Trauma itself, it needs to be healed, and if left untreated and left unhealed, might contribute. Then we have what's called the contagion of violence within communities. You may have heard people say violence is like a disease. It spreads in some ways like coronavirus, right? That your exposure to it can change.
What they all agree on? America's unique dependence on incarceration is not only not fixing violence in communities, it's making it worse. Here's David Muhammad, Executive Director of the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform.
If you treated everybody who got sick with chemotherapy, you would know that that was a horrible intervention. But that's what we're doing with incarceration. Everybody who has any form of misbehavior or delinquency or criminality, we are incarcerating. And that's an ineffective strategy. And that makes the situation worse. And so incarceration has been proven to be ineffective, harmful, and excessively expensive.
While organizers inherently take a different approach than law enforcement or incarceration, that doesn't mean they don't sometimes use some tough love.
There's nobody combating those decisions. There's nobody combating those conversations. There's nobody just saying there's a different way. And we're saying, that's a shame, and we apologize you've gotten to this place, but no more. We refuse to accept that. I will drag you if necessary. I will pick you up and carry you if necessary. And then when we finally land, you understand.
Shantae Jackson works in Baltimore as the director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, and emphasizes how important building trust and credibility with a community is.
Many of the folks that we have doing our work come from spaces of either being victims of gun violence or perpetrators of gun violence, having served time for doing that.
Sometimes called credible messengers. People who are from those neighborhoods, maybe formerly incarcerated, have a sense of credibility as well as knowledge.
Now, to be clear, organizers and activists like these have been working in communities for decades. But amidst the re-examining of the drug war, the national reckoning over police and racism in 2020, and increasingly clear data, more attention is being paid to these efforts than ever. And with it, money. Increasingly, cities and states across the country are sending money to these kinds of community programs, some of which are already proving they can work.
There is far greater evidence of these community-based violence reduction efforts being successful than there is of the criminal justice system or law enforcement being successful. In fact, most of those studies show ineffectiveness.
Look at the numbers. There are implementations of violence intervention and prevention programming all across this country. We're seeing New York do this really well. We're seeing Louisville do this well. We're seeing Philly do this well. We're seeing Oakland.
And with the federal government beginning to test the waters, many, like Cities United Executive Director Anthony Smith, are making the case to Congress and the White House to shift funding away from traditional approaches and towards their work.
So when you actually put those programs in place and you fund them and you support them and you get the right people who know how to do that work and train to do that work, you see the reductions happen over time.
And while these organizers often garner praise, they say they hope it's the young people they're working with who get the credit for breaking the cycles of violence.
Folks will come to us and they will say, hey, this program has helped reduce gun violence significantly in these X, Y, and Z cities. And I'll say, thanks for that. But what's reduced gun violence in X, Y, and Z city are fellows who are making healthier decisions.
And they want to be clear about why there's a need for their work in the first place.
At the end of the day, what drives gun violence in our cities is actually poverty, and it's the structural racism that folks are dealing with. So when folks have no opportunities, no access to resources, and limited choices, then this is what we get.
We are reaping what was cultivated, decades ago by policymakers, whether it's the war on drugs or the child predator laws, you name it.
This is a racist country. This country was built on racism. People of color in this country have been a commodity to this country and have earned everyone resources except people of color.
For now, these leaders remain focused on their communities, but they hope the rest of the country's focus and resources will soon meet them there.
With the full understanding that sometimes we might not get it right, but if we're failing forward and failing fast, then we're doing much better than failing backwards and forward.